Hello everybody, welcome to this introductory lecture on secondary English language arts assessment. This is just going to provide you with a few examples of different sorts of assessments and different sorts of tools that you might use in order to help your kids navigate the waters of ELA. This series includes, discussions of formative assessment, what formative assessment is, what summative assessment is, some examples of summative assessment, and some examples of formative structures that you might introduce into your classroom that can help your kids, little scaffolding ideas and activities and these sorts of things. Okay. So, when we begin looking at assessment in the ELA classroom, 4 basic questions you ought to ask yourself is, when you sit down to look at what your students are doing or decide what they're up to, why are you assessing them and what are you assessing? What's the point of this? What's your objective? And what are you assessing here in particular? Look back at your program of studies. How is this particular task related to the objectives or the outcomes stated in the program of studies? Okay? How do you assess for differentiated instruction? In other words, it's important to consider here that not every student is the same, naturally, and that therefore, when you want to find out whether a student is, demonstrating a particular knowledge base or a skills base or an attitude base, do you provide different ways for him or her to express that? And if they can express it in one way, but not another, is that good enough? Maybe one student can express an attitude or a skill very well, or a knowledge very well through writing. Another one might do so through speaking. Another one might do so through artistic means or visual means. You get the drift. And a third point, how can you integrate authentic formative class assessment within your specialized subject area? Now, by authenticity here, I'm kind of taking Newman's approach. And in that approach, the 3 hubs of this are whatever task that you design for your students, number 1, is it authentic in the sense that does it resonate with the student? Does it matter to that student personally, right? Does it say something about that student's life? Does it have meaning or significance in the real world outside of the classroom, right? Does it have meaning and significance in that student's own personal existence? Does it teach them something about themselves? I guess another thing about authentic assessment is, does it engage students in deep, thoughtful, inquiry? Does it dig deep? Does it go deep into a subject? This is an important thing to consider when you design your assessments. And then a third thing, if we just think in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, which I'm sure as Bachelor of Education students you know something about already, how well does this assessment construct knowledge? How well does this task invite students to construct knowledge? So, does it go up the Bloomian taxonomy, right? Is it simply asking them to regurgitate facts or knowledge back at you, or is it asking for something more complicated than that? Does it ask them, for instance, to comprehend what they're learning? Does it ask them to apply what they're learning, or analyze what they're learning, or synthesize what they're learning, or evaluate what they're learning? These sorts of things. Okay? And then a fourth consideration, especially when we move away from formative assessments into summative assessments, is this something that you could do well to organize or develop a summative assessment for, like a rubric? Okay. Trends in thinking about assessment. There are two basic forms of assessment, right? People talk about other things, but I like to just keep it simple. There's summative assessments and there's formative assessments. So, here in Alberta, for instance, we have these large government-mandated end-of-year exams. These things are thankfully subsiding into the dustbin of history. They used to be worth 50% in Alberta for the longest time. Now they're actually worth only 30% of a student's grade, thankfully, in grade 12. But they're still big ticket items. Anyway, so a summative assessment, what it does is it asks students, at the end of the year, it's a snapshot, right, of how they've achieved according to the outcomes that are stipulated in the program of studies. And it does so using typically, kind of a government-mandated format, like multiple choice, for instance, or some sort of canned kind of written format that everybody across the province is expected to show some competence in. And then the other form, whereas summative is like a snapshot of learning at a specific time, and then you use it for bean counting purposes, like ranking students. A formative assessment is more like, you as the teacher, you find out how a student's doing. You look at, their competencies, how well they've demonstrated this knowledge or that skill or this attitude, and then you try to figure out, okay, well, how can I help them from here? So, people lots of times they parcel off diagnostic assessments away from formative assessments, but I don't see why, really. A diagnostic assessment is just a formative assessment. It's just like, okay, well, here's a student that's in front of me. This is how he or she's doing. How can I help them? So, formative and summative. Just keep it nice and simple like that, and then you don't have to get all confused with all this stupid terminology we have in education. Okay? Two basic types of assessment. Again, formative assessment measures progress during an activity. It documents achievement over time. It encourages or assists or helps students form their abilities. So hence assessment for learning. Sometimes we call it AFL, right? Examples of this are classroom discussions, reading and writing conferences, self-reflections, feedback on writing, presentations, right? All these sorts of things. Even report card comments, right? The things that you write on the students' report cards. Those things are formative in nature. Summative assessments rather sum up what a student has learned at any given time, like a snapshot. They're used to rank students, bean count them. They're also used to rank schools and teachers, right? We often call that AOL, or assessment of learning. So you got your standardized tests, or your end exams, your quizzes, your report card marks, those sorts of things. Here's a nice little chart of some of the differences between formative and summative assessment. You can see that formative assessment, in formative assessment, a student's aware of the questions throughout the assessment process. Summative assessment, it's a surprise. It's like an ambush. formative assessment, timing is flexible, right? If a student needs more time, no worries, just take the time. Summative assessments, these are like, well, time's up, put your pencils down, right? A formative assessment, a teacher's feedback is commentary, including perhaps a letter or a number grade. Whereas with summative assessment, all you get is a letter or a number grade. In fact, probably, I used to always include both a letter and or a number grade along with feedback, but I don't know. Over the years, I'm starting to think that really what ends up happening if you give a letter or a number grade along with the commentary, kids have a tendency just to look at the letter, look at the percentage, and then they discard everything else, right? So probably, if you're wise and you want the kids to look at the comments, all that time that you took to write stuff on their papers and that, really, it's best for you just to write that, leave off the number grade. Maybe just record it in your own books, and then this entices the kids. They will end up reading what you wrote on their papers more often than not if you just give them the feedback, the written feedback, as opposed to actually giving them the letter or number grade. Okay? Evaluation in formative assessment is used for future learning, whereas in summative assessment it's just used as a bean counting machine. Here the next point, they're talking about Vygotsky here, right? So the zone of proximal development. So you're looking at where each kid is. You're not looking at treating every kid as the same kid, right? The standard kid. Where the standard kid is and everybody else is measured against them. Formative assessment doesn't do that. Summative assessment does do that, okay? In a formative assessment, your test can be flexible. You can say, well, we'll have different versions of the test, maybe, or we'll have, we won't worry so much about, time constraints or these sorts of things. In a summative assessment, you pretty much treat everybody the same way. Students in formative assessment, they're involved in the assessment themselves, right? There's self-assessment. In summative assessment, lots of times even the classroom teacher isn't even involved. Lots of times they don't even trust us to do that. They like in Alberta, we send all the tests up to Edmonton to be marked by anonymous teachers who mark based on student numbers. In fact, some schools try to encourage that stupidity basically by saying, well, you're not allowed to mark your own kids' work. We're all going to pool together as teachers say in English language arts, and we're all going to mark each other's things just to be fair. And I don't know, whatever floats your boat. I guess you do what you're told, right, as a teacher. Another thing with formative assessment, it's about setting reachable targets for future learning. It looks at where is a kid, what's a kid's interest, what's a kid capable of, what's a kid's willing to try. Versus in summative assessment, when it's over, right? There's no consideration for that sort of thing. It's not concerned with learning, it's concerned with bean counting and end of year results. Or end of unit results even. And then formative assessment too, results are not used in report card grades here, right? The things that we think about, that we use in order to understand how a kid's doing, these sorts of things enter into our machinations, our suggestions, our enticements for that child to learn. But they don't necessarily show up on a report card. In summative assessment, obviously, it's thrown into the report. Okay? Formative alternatives to summative assessment. When you're thinking about formative assessment, you try to develop assessments that occur on a daily basis as part of an ongoing reading or writing campaign, right? Formative assessments involve a variety of reading or writing events, right? So you don't always do the same thing all the time. You try to do different things. You see what a kid's strengths are, what a kid's weaknesses are, what a kid likes, what a kid dislikes, these sorts of things, right? It's daily, it's over time, it's formative, it's helping them form. There's concern with not just products, but also process, right? You don't have that in summative assessment. Really not a lot of concern for process. It's just product. When the rubber hits the road, what's Buddy do? Right? In formative, we're much more concerned with process. And it honors multiple perspectives, right? There's not a lot of choice. Multiple choice. It's funny, they call multiple choice, but really there's no choice, right? There's one answer. And you're screwed if you don't get the right answer. Formative assessment isn't like that at all, right? You look and you try to understand from multiple perspectives how a thing might be approached or developed or whatever. Formative alternatives to assessment also help students learn rather than simply measure what they know, okay? And they bring together data from several different sources. So you don't just give all tests or all essays or all presentations, or you get the picture. You mix things together. You try different things. This is all part of formative assessment. Get a better picture of where kids are at. Some good assessment practices. Well, remember, right? Probably most of you in a Bachelor of Education program have heard of Gardner and his multiple intelligences theory. Now, all that means is that different kids learn in different ways. They have different strengths. They have different weaknesses. Some kids, are very logical. Other ones are very musical. Some are, they're more insular. Some are more outgoing. Some are more, active with their body. Other kids are more sedentary. Some are more So the point is, kids can demonstrate their knowledge and their understanding and their skills and their attitudes in a variety of different ways. And, that's what you're looking for. Ultimately, if you look at your program of studies and it's looking for a particular understanding, there are all different kinds of ways that different sorts of kids can demonstrate that, right? So when you're planning, all this means is that plan so that kids have a kind of choice. So, one kid's like a monkey, let him show what he knows as a monkey. One kid's like a penguin, let him show what he knows as a penguin, or an elephant, like the picture there in the little cartoon, right? It's all about choice, in other words. When you're developing your ELA classroom strategies, think about choice. Giving kids lots and lots of different choices here. You don't have to be infinite or anything. That's too much to ask of you, and that could be kind of intimidating for kids as well, right? But within a narrow range of choices, this can be really good for them. And it can save your own sanity too, because then you're getting different sorts of products, different sorts of processes alive in your classroom, and it really makes for a more interesting day for you as well. Okay? It's all about interest. Also, why have it so that, when a kid writes an essay, it's a one-shot deal? Like, nobody learns how to read or to write or to do anything just in a one-off, right? How did you become a good writer? Was it by just writing an essay and handing it in and getting a mark and then doing another? No, it's through the writing processes, right? So think of that. Just keep that in mind in your classroom. Have opportunities for second chances and rewrites. Like, make if you have to give out marks, everybody has to give out marks. Make the marks contingent upon the kids rewriting stuff. Give them an option to rewrite things. Give them a little carrot there that asks them, okay, well, if you hand this stuff in on time for me, you're going to have the option to do a rewrite, and I'm going to give you, say, the higher of the 2 marks, or something like that. that, in my experience, tends to work really well with certain students. Okay, so rewrites, also makeup assignments, right? Say, one element of study, you've got this little daily assignment that you've given students. It didn't resonate well with this student. He didn't do a good job of it, or he didn't understand it. Maybe he doesn't get poetry, but he really gets short stories, right, or something like that. Or maybe he just crapped the bed that day, right, and maybe he had a bad day. Why have that as some kind of a anvil hanging around his neck? Say, okay, well, that's not good for you. Well, here, try. Here's an opportunity for you, to do some kind of an equivalent makeup assignment that would help you improve your grades. It's extra work on your part, obviously, right? It takes a little bit of time, but kids can appreciate it, and it can make for better learning. Now, not always is it the case that second chances make sense in education. I mean, I remember one year after I'd left teaching high school, I took a job interview for a local position where they were looking for someone to help design curriculum for the firefighters in town here. And I was telling the firefighter, the chief there, during the interview, a little bit about how assessment works at the high school with second chances. And he'd never heard of that. Like, he thought it was wild, because when he was a kid, you either did it or you didn't, or you flunked out, right? And it was funny to him, and it was funny to the entire panel of judges, which is probably one of the reasons I didn't end up getting the job, apart from the fact that I know nothing about fighting fires. But for them, second chances made zero sense. Here you have somebody who's fallen into cardiac arrest. That person needs to have the person who's trying to save them needs to demonstrate the ability to perform CPR properly, to be able to meet the challenge of this high pressure environment immediately. And there are no second chances in such a situation. So, providing second chances in every learning situation is probably kind of stupid. I think that I share their sentiment in that regard. But in an ELA classroom, it's not a life and death thing. These are kids. So take that under your consideration. Provide scaffolding for student writing and performance by offering them lots of comments and suggestions, questions on their submissions. Now, I used to write an awful lot on students' papers. I'd write in the margins. I'd offer little suggestions about grammar and syntax and spelling and commas and punctuation and all that sort of thing as well. I think that you can decide for yourself what's overkill and what's not. But generally, my inclination as a teacher was always to write more rather than less. Even though I understood, and I saw it happen time and time again, where I would write so much on a student's paper and I'd give them back in the high school, and the kids wouldn't even look at it. They'd just look at the mark, and then if the mark was where they wanted it to be, they'd toss it in the garbage. Or if the mark wasn't where they wanted it to be, then they would use the comments. But that being said, sometimes I would even write more, perhaps, and put more comments on there and more effort into writing comments than the student maybe even did to write the paper. But I always felt like I couldn't help myself but do that, because it may be the only time in the student's life where somebody actually takes the time to read, to seriously consider their thoughts as written down on paper. You leave high school, who gives a damn about what you think, right? Who gives a damn about the things that you write? Are you going to ever write anything again? Lots of students, maybe they'll write text message. Maybe they don't even use email anymore. We've become largely, I think, a illiterate culture, because why would we, right? So I don't know. I mean, you can make your own judgments on this. Sometimes perhaps you feel like, you wrote all this all for naught. But in my experience, not everybody takes advantage of the things that you write, but some do. All right. So I think it's a valuable exercise for you to write. And then you give this and you say, okay, well, you don't have to fix everything to fix something. You don't have to change everything. You don't have to make everything better to make one thing better. Pick from the comments and the questions and the suggestions that I've given you. If you want to do a rewrite, pick some of these things, and then give me the old copy with the new copy, staple them together, hand them in, and we'll see longitudinally how you've improved things. This is how you entice students to improve their writing, in my experience. Now, sometimes you're going to find a student hands you some work. You're going to get one of these stream of consciousness kinds of essays that's just rambling. It just goes from point to point. You can't figure out what the sense of it is, what the order of it is, what the structure of it is. With a student like that, often all they need is, something like a simple writing template. Something that will help them organize their work. Now, here's an example of a writing template I used to use quite frequently with high school students, right? You could see thesis statement, the various premises. It's for an argument paper, right? The first premise there, obviously, it has more support than the second, third, fourth, or fifth. The fifth premise would obviously really suck, as would probably the fourth one. So, the nice thing about a visual template like this is it actually helps you help the kids, right? They fill it out and they say, oh, well, my idea for a fourth premise was kind of crappy because I only have such a little amount of support for it, so I'll leave that one off, right? And I'll just focus on maybe the first two or the first three. Something like that. So, these sorts of visual prompts can be of great value for students, and they'll help them organize and formulate paragraphs better and argumentative structures better. Okay? And remarking things, right? Remark things students produce and fix and improve through guidance from you. And offer alternative ways for students to make up poor showings on previous assignments, right? You can do enrichment stuff. I've heard people whine and complain about how you shouldn't do bonus stuff. You know what? Whatever, right? In your class, in your school, if they're down on that, why die on that hill? But I don't have a problem personally with a bonus assignment, right? You get a kid who has kind of sucked out in the year, or he's been really good, but he's not content with this, right? And you say, okay, well, here's an optional bonus assignment. If you do this, we can take this in. Here's a bonus essay, right? If you write this, not everybody has to, but if you do this, I'll take it in, I'll look at it, I'll work with you, I'll go through writing processes with you, I'll score it for you, you can decide if you want to rewrite it, and then if it's really good stuff, we'll look back at your record from earlier in the term and we'll say, okay, well, that essay, we'll fold this one in place of that essay, right? Honestly, I don't see what all the whining is about bonus essays and bonus assignments. I think that lots of times people are just whatever. But that's for you to consider as a teacher. Another thing, right? Again, in Alberta, these are two examples of, in grade 12, the two... or I guess it's just the one, isn't it? This is both of them. This is the personal response, and this is the critical essay. So these are the big ticket items for grade 12 advanced English in Alberta. Now, these kids are in grade 12 basically in grade 12 English, lots of times their experience of English is ruined because what is it? It's the teacher is completely freaked out and under such pressure for kids to perform that, she ends up just doing nothing but test prep all damn year. It sucks. It's miserable. And that is so common. It's crazy. What can you do as a new teacher entering into the field? You can do some of this. I mean, there's nothing wrong with test prep. The kids will appreciate test prep. But, not test prep all the time. One way to test prep kids, honestly, is just have them start utilizing the rubrics that the teachers are going to use up in Edmonton when they mark these things anonymously, right? These are the two rubrics that are used at the grade 12 level. You can have the kids, for instance, write an essay or write a personal response in class for you, not put their real name on it, right? You can have them type it out if you want to get into the library or into the computer lab or whatever. You want them to type it out, have them type it out. Honestly, I was always fine with them even using handwriting. But if you want to make it really anonymous, typing's cool because then not necessarily anyone will recognize their writing, right? You don't have them put their student name on it, but you have them put their student number on it. And then you have each paper marked by or assessed by two other peers, right, anonymously. And then they can write freely on their comments, and it doesn't then become a popularity contest or giving my friend a high mark or my enemy a low mark, but it gets the kids thinking about how to apply those rubric criteria that are being being held to account for as they write their grade 12 diplomas. See? So getting them to do peer assessments anonymously like the students might or will, in fact, have happened to them in their grade 12 year, except at the hands of teachers. It's good, it's helpful, it's valuable. Gets kids employing the rubric, thinking about the components of the rubric in relation to their own work. Okay? Another thing, obviously, that's just with writing. One of the things that kids have a big problem with is speaking in front of crowds, right? You've got a classroom. Some classrooms are more inviting than others, right? And some kids respond really well. Some kids, they find writing horrible, painful experience. But when you give them a chance to speak in front of their peers, they shine, It can be quite the opposite, though. So what sort of scaffolding options can you offer students when, here they are, they have to do a presentation for you? Sometimes presenting in a group can be less stressful than presenting on one's own. Sometimes, taking the eyes off of the presenter and simply having the eyes redirected towards an LCD presentation, right? A PowerPoint presentation or something like that. The lights are off. The student's not necessarily the center of the attention, but he or she has designed some kind of a presentation that the other students can look at while he or she's speaking. That can make all the difference, right? Just even having some peer support for them while they're speaking, and then lots and lots of positive comments and coaxing and encouragement. These things are all part of assessment and formative assessment practices. Now, chasing grades is another thing. I've been in different kinds of schools. One of the schools that I was in, kids couldn't care a rat's ass about grades, right? And honestly, in a school where grades don't matter as much, the learning can actually matter a hell of a lot more. But then you get into another school where everybody's mom and dad is a doctor and a lawyer and an Indian chief, and it just becomes sometimes overwhelming how students are fixated on grades, and this can kill their love of learning. They're scared. They become timid, in their learning because they're so worried about making a mistake. And they not only that, but they start to identify their own value as a human being with how well they score on a test or on an exam or on an essay. It's just horrible. And so can you as a teacher, right? Can you as a teacher devise things, develop your own classroom practices so that students don't feel so beholden and identified with their grades? So, what does assessment like this do to the love of learning? One of the suggestions I have for you, because you're going to be so busy as teachers, don't mark everything, okay? If you try to mark everything, you're going to kill yourself. As an English teacher in high school, you don't have just one class, right? You're not in junior high, or you're not in elementary where, you might have 36, 40 students. You're going to have probably 120, 150 students a day. If you try to mark everything, you're going to burn yourself out. So, and not only that, but it's kind of silly. You can see this picture I have here. If you're marking everything, it's like you're gauging your son or your daughter's height against the wall, right, with a ruler. Like, it's stupid to measure your son or your daughter every single day to see how they've grown. Chances are, if you have that practice at home, what you do is you maybe measure them on their birthday, right? You see how they're doing. And then you can see, oh, look how much you grew in a year, or even in 6 months, look how much you grew. It becomes significant then. But if you're marking every single day, it can be really dumb. It can be self-defeating. It can suck the life out of you. And not only that, but it can be stifling for the kids too, right? So consider taking it more easy on yourself. Take it more easy on the kids. Don't mark everything. Feedback's good. Formative assessment's good. But marking everything is just silly. And there's lots of crap assessment out there too. Now, crap assessment can be assessment that's not accurate, right? That doesn't necessarily measure what you think it measures. But on the other hand, crap assessment can actually be really accurate, but it actually destroys a student's love of learning. It crushes their love of learning, right? So, in the Alberta education system, I guess we pride ourselves on like the millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars that are spent on assessment and these big stupid tests we have up in Edmonton. We pride ourselves on how accurate those things are and all this stuff. But really, what does that do? Have any of these people set foot in a grade 12 classroom and seen how these things kill the love of learning, kill the love of literature, kill the love of poetry? I was a field instructor a few years ago for a number of years, and I can tell you that I remember going into a classroom and I had a student who was a really wonderful student teacher, and he wanted to teach poetry to grade 12s, and he was so excited to get in there and teach poetry. But his partner teacher wouldn't let him write poetry with the kids. Why? Because on the final exams, you can't write poetry, right? They don't let you write poetry. Why? Well, because poetry, there's no rules to grammar, and how are you going to gauge whether or not students can write grammatically, or syntactically correctly or whatever, and therefore, there's all these strictures against ever writing poetry on a final exam. Therefore, we're not going to write any. And what did they do? The only thing he was allowed to do during their poetry unit was do multiple choice. And this is at a high performance school, right? This is at a school that prides itself on pumping out all kinds of doctors and lawyers and astronauts and. So crap assessment isn't just that it's inaccurate, it's that it kills learning, love of learning. All right, so there's different types of assessments. I think the next time we talk, we're going to talk about rubrics. Thanks for listening.